This is Dan Schneider. On this Dan Schneider video interview, the subject is WKRP in Cincinnati, the classic television sitcom from the 1970s. I'm speaking with TV and media reporter John Kieswetter, and the conversation will begin in a moment. John Kieswetter is my guest. He's a TV and media reporter from the Cincinnati area, and we will be talking about the classic American television show WKRP in Cincinnati. Welcome, John. If you could give a little bit of background about who you are, what you do, etc., and then we'll hit the ground running.
Well, I worked 40 years for the Cincinnati Enquirer, the morning paper, and the last 30 of it I was the TV columnist. And when I got downsized 10 years ago, I moved over to Cincinnati Public Radio, NPR affiliate WVXU, and they allowed me to do the same coverage, some on air, mostly on their blog and their webpage. And so I've been writing about TV and media for 40 years. I started on a beat in 1985, so by that point, KRP had been canceled for 3 years, but it's still a top. I mean, the show is beloved here in Cincinnati. Mm-hmm. The characters are beloved, the cast members, and I would always generate great interest when I write a story about it. And so I probably have written more about KRP than any other TV writer around, from over the times that I would go to Los Angeles twice a year for the Enquirer, met most of the cast members, was on the set of the new KRP when the revival was there briefly for 2 years in the early 90s, as different people, Gary Sandy or Richard Sanders or Gordon Jump came to town, I'd interview them. So, and in fact, I started the paper in 75, so I was at the paper and working as a journalist, but not TV writer, when the show started in 78 and when they pulled the plug in 82. But it's always been great fun. I get great reaction to writing anything about WKRP.
So as a TV and media reporter, probably before WKRP came on the air, most people would have probably, if you said Cincinnati, would have thought of the Cincinnati Reds, the Big Red Machine, the baseball team from the 70s when they were dominating for a decade. Then maybe, the Cincinnati Bengals. There had been a basketball team with Oscar Robertson there. But by the late 70s, outside of sports, Cincinnati never really had a presence. This is maybe, as far as I know, the first, if not the only show to be set in the Cincinnati area. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's a couple asterisks to that. In the actually, the Edge of Night, the old CBS soap opera, mm-hmm. because it was sponsored by Procter & Gamble, based here in Cincinnati, and a major advertiser. Actually, the cityscape was used as in the opening logo for it. And in the city has a rich broadcasting history. We have a 50,000 watt AM station, WLW, that in the 1930s was the only 500,000 watt AM station. And a man named Powell Crosley was the man behind it. And they were doing TV experiments in the late 30s, in addition to I guess a year before TV was actually shown experimentally in 1939 during the World's Fair in New York. So and the WLW affiliate here in Cincinnati was the first NBC affiliate after the station signed on in 1948, and they would provide, back then they were called summer replacement shows for Sid Caesar's show of shows and other things that ran network. But mostly, you're right. Nationally, from coast to coast, particularly in the 70s, this was Big Red Machine territory.
So let's talk about a little background of how the show got started. The 1970s was an era where sitcoms seemed to rule. You had a few producers like Norman Lear with All in the Family and all of those shows, Sanford and Son. You had Gary Marshall with The Odd Couple and Happy Days, Laverne and Shirley. You had Aaron Spelling doing some bigger soapy kind of shows and little shows here and there before he hit it big in the 80s. And then you basically had Mary Tyler Moore, which was one of the few that was owned by the titular Mary Tyler Moore, who started her own production company, much like Lucille Ball had done with Desi Liu
Yeah.
a decade or so
Yes.
before. And you had MTM, you had Bob Newhart, you had the spin-offs of them, Rhoda and Phyllis, and you had a number of other shows too. WKRP is coming on the heels of probably half a dozen hit shows. And I think probably by the mid 80s, late 80s maybe, MTM had sort of dissolved or been bought out or something. So where is that in the timeline of the MTM universe?
It's kind of late in the MTM because the Hugh Wilson, who created the show in 1978, had moved from Atlanta and come to L.A. and actually worked on the Tony Randall show, and a Tony Randall show from MTM in the late 70s.
Yeah, he played a judge in Philly, I think.
I believe I don't know if I've ever watched it, but then he went off to write his own pilot of this crazy radio station, and so it aired from 78 to 82, and I don't have it in front of me, but eventually Grant Tinker left MTM and was the president of NBC Entertainment for a while before Brandon Tartikoff. So I'm not sure, but MTM continued as a studio because it was still a studio in the early 1990s when it revived the KRP, what was called the new KRP, and then eventually that was bought out. Might have been by Pat Robertson, but it was bought out and they shut down the new KRP in 1990, June of 1993, at that point.
So WKRP was used as the call letters of the station as well as in the title. Its mascot was supposedly a carp. Was there any particular radio station in Cincinnati that was sort of the basis for this?
No. There's been a long time station going back to, 100 years ago, a WKRC, but it had nothing to do with WKRP. Hugh Wilson had told me years ago that KRP stood for crap, and it was a crappy little station, so that's why he picked that. And then when he talked after several of the call letters for WKRP, and he needed something that because he actually wrote the lyrics to the theme song. Mm-hmm. So he picked Cincinnati because he thought WKRP in Cincinnati worked well, sounded well. Grant Tinker liked it because it was a nice middle American city, and they thought they could do a pretty good little comedy here. So it was, Hugh Wilson had never been to Cincinnati. I don't know if he ever made it, but they came out here and explored the area. They worked with a videographer who later would do the second unit stuff, the local scenes that they would put in, and they kind of walked him through the opening scenes and the opening credits that were all shot here before the show went on the air in 82.
So the MTM formula was usually to have one star and then a good ensemble cast around it. Mary Tyler Moore, Bob Newhart, the guy who played Valerie Harper, etc., and then surrounded with an ensemble cast. WKRP sort of breaks from that formula in that there is no Mary Tyler Moore, there is no Bob Newhart that the show is named after, or named after a character. It's truly an ensemble cast, but it does seem to be that if one were to say the character that is maybe the central character is Andy Travis, played by Gary Sandy, even though he's sort of almost like the stand-in for the audience. He's like the one lone sane person filled with in a show with characters. Was Sandy cast for that role specifically because he was that everyman?
Sandy, true, was the sane guy surrounded by a bunch of crazies. I mean, it's a formula that's been used many times, whether it was the old Jack Benny show, whether it was Frasier, others. He was actually the last person cast. Like they had settled on everybody else. He was his ambition. He actually grew up in Dayton, as did Gordon Jump. So there's two people from the general southwestern Ohio area. Um, he wanted to be an actor, and his dream was a Broadway actor. And he went to New York and Broadway, and he kept on losing roles to everybody or a lot of people who had TV credits. So he said, "I'll go show him. I'm going to go to L.A. and gets a TV credit so he could be a Broadway lead." And he told me he read the part and understood what they were looking for. They, kind of the long hair, tight jeans, good looking guy. And he said, I knew what they wanted and came in and gave it to him and was hired for the role. But he realized also that he was the straight man, basically, to this cast of crazy characters that were different people, the different employees of the radio station.
Now you mentioned Gordon Jump. Gordon Jump had a long history as a minor character actor, doing a lot of commercials. I don't recall if it was before or after WKRP. He became the Maytag washing machine.
Right.
But he plays the owner, or maybe technically he's the son of the owner.
Right.
There. Was this his big break in that it made his name, that he's forever known now as Mr. Carlson?
Yeah. Before that, his longest or biggest recurring role had been as a police officer on Soap, the Billy Crystal.
Oh yes.
Crazy sitcom.
Yeah, I remember.
And he was kind of the heart and soul of the station, but he was also the heart and soul of the cast. I mean, he was much older than all the other cast members. They kind of looked up to him, and it was a really tight cast because they would meet every Christmas at Gordon Jump's house or at Hugh Wilson's house, and they continued that after the show was canceled.
Probably the 1970s was when the term breakout character was coined. Fonzie on Happy Days was a breakout character. Vinnie Barbarino on Welcome Back, Kotter was a breakout character. And there was always sort of that formula looking for, potential breakout characters. On WKRP, Howard Hessman's Johnny Fever, I guess he was the lead jockey or the early morning disc jockey, was that character. And Hessman had a long history within the MTM universe. He played a gay character on the Bob Newhart show, and I think he had a few other roles here and there in the MTM universe. But for some reason, his character just caught on. Was he indeed the most popular character?
I would say, yeah, he was probably the face of the show, but also in talking to many of the cast members and everybody involved in the show, the other cast members were strong enough that they could carry the lead storyline of a sitcom, whether it was something about Lonnie Anderson's character Jennifer, or whether it was, Richard Sanders as Les Nessman. But yeah, Johnny. The interesting thing about Hessman is that in the late '60s, he had been a disc jockey on an album-oriented rock station. I believe I know in California. I think it was in San Francisco. So he kind of knew, who this guy was when they hired him.
And another character that is fondly remembered is Richard Sanders as Les Nessman. And Les Nessman was sort of the classic Nebuchadnezzar with the Coke bottle eyeglasses, the receding hairline, the timid persona. And this was also a character that I think had a lot of fan love, if you will.
Eccentric.
What, I'm sorry? Yeah, the eccentric.
Eccentric, yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about his character?
Yeah, he was. I'm told he was in person. He was much the same way. That it was not that much difference between Les and Richard Sanders. I honestly can't tell you what he has done before then. I know for years afterwards he would use his Les Nessman characters and be involved with replications of the famous turkey episode. But they,
Yeah.
he came to town here and they dropped ping pong balls over a mall. Sometimes they dropped stuffed animals. Sometimes they like plastic Easter eggs that had coupons inside of it or something. Um, and he was the other interesting thing about Richard Sanders, most of the other people you can find under the IMDb, the International Movie Database, on what they, and he's really been out of sight for years.
Mm.
Where at the back in 2014, the Paley Center in Los Angeles had a cast reunion, and he wasn't there, and I've not seen anything. I mean, he's seen anything about him probably in 10 years.
Yeah, I do think that he played a character on another television show for one or two episodes. I can't remember where, but yeah, it's one of those things that, I mean, he's almost like born to play that character kind of thing.
Whereas Herb, the guy who played Herb
Yeah.
Tarley, Frank Bonner, he didn't have a lot of acting credits shortly after that, but he went into directing. He directed
Okay.
sitcoms, and he was behind the camera for like 20 years doing directing mostly sitcoms. I don't think he did any dramas, but so he had a pretty active Hollywood career. He just wasn't seen on TV in other roles.
Yeah, and Bonner, his character, Herb Tarlick, was number one. He wore all the worst kinds of 1970s suits. I mean, if you could mismatch clothing, his character would do that. But he also played this, or try. Well, he wasn't really a sleazy character. He sort of played a sleazy character, or wanted to be a sleazy character. But when push came to shove, he actually was loyal to his wife and kids. So that's an interesting kind of twist.
Uh, True, but he was. It was interesting. I've heard Gary Sandy and Gordon Jump both say that when they have been to radio stations, go to markets for different things and run into radio people, they say, I used to work with a guy like Herb, or I used to work with a guy like Gordon Jump, or I used to work with a guy like Herb Tarlick, or Les Nessman. One of the things, the overview on this show is it was great writing, and it was a great cast, and it was just a cosmic collection of just the perfect people and writing and all. The only people that didn't get it was CBS, that bounced it around a dozen time slots over 4 years, and that's what killed it.
Yeah.
It should have lasted much longer, and the cast all said that too.
We'll get to that a little bit later
Okay.
on. But yeah, the Frank Bonner's character, Herb Tarlick, really nails the sleazy salesman type. And I've worked in retail. I've done phone work and other stuff. There are always people like him in every sales department. Now, the object of Frank's lust was the character of Jennifer Marlowe, played by Lonnie Anderson. And this was, being the late 70s, this was the start of the so-called T&A era. You'd have Charlie's Angels. You had Three's Company with, what was the blonde's name? I can't remember her name.
Farrah Fawcett.
No, on Three's Company. What was the name? Suzanne Summers.
Suzanne Summers.
Yeah. And there were a few other shows that had usually a blonde character who was a ditz, but was the lead character of the show. The Jennifer character, though, was the opposite of the Suzanne Summers character for Three's Company, in that while Gary Sandy was the most normal character, she seemed to have talents in every field. If someone had a question about nuclear physics, Jennifer knew the answer.
No, she insisted on being very smart. And she didn't, that whole thing about, no, she doesn't get coffee for the big guy, she was a model, grew up in Minnesota, was in beauty pageants, but as a brunette, and she apparently dyed her hair shortly before KRP, and then they got the gig, and it was legendary. The poster of her in the red bathing suit was on plenty of walls of bedrooms of teenage boys from coast to coast.
Now, the other female character, or main female character on the show, was played by Jan Smithers, Bailey Quarters.
Right.
And there was sort of the same kind of dichotomy between Jennifer and Bailey as there was between Ginger and Marianne on Gilligan's Island a decade plus earlier. With Bailey in the Marianne role, sort of speaking. But she wasn't quite mousy, but she was the quiet one who did everything that no one else wanted to do, it seemed. And I think Jan Smithers was actually a model too, was she not?
Her breakthrough was when she was photographed on the riding the back of a motorcycle on the cover of Newsweek. Um, she what was interesting is shortly after KRP ended, she was involved with James Brolin, the
Mm-hmm.
actor who was on ABC in the film in the show Hotel,
Yeah.
and was with him for a number of years. And really, she has no acting credits shortly after KRP. And Brolin was with her for a number of years, and then later is now with Barbara Streisand. But I always felt watching her that Hugh Wilson or nobody really knew what to do with her,
Yeah.
or how she fit in. I could tell you a funny story from
Go ahead.
two years ago with when I was with Gary Sandy a while, and much to your point, somebody came up to Gary Sandy and said, "Bailey or Jennifer?" And he just kind of laughed, and then he told a story that there's an episode, I think in the third season, where they were promoting some sort of a beach thing, and it's a two-part thing. It was called, I think, Dirty Pictures, where a photographer took uh, uh, pictures of Jennifer as she was changing her clothes from their clothes into the bathing suit for this promotional shot. And Gary Sandy said originally that scene was supposed to be with Bailey and Jennifer. And Jennifer refused to do it because she wanted to be the only person seen in a bathing suit on the show, and she wanted to be the sex symbol, and she wouldn't do it if also Jan Smithers was going to be in a bathing suit. So Gary Sandy said that's why I'm in the scene with the beach ball throwing it back and forth with Jennifer, not Bailey. And he said that he was only learned of this like on a week's notice. So he said that's why I hold the beach ball in front of me because I wasn't as trim as he wanted to be seen. And he also said that that Jan was a very attractive woman, but she was dressed the way she was to kind of cover up her physical attributes, and it's why she looks kind of homely most of the time. Was he said because Jennifer had the clout that she wanted to be seen as the only sex symbol on the show and didn't want any competition from Jan.
Now, the last of the main characters was Tim Reed's character, Venus Flytrap, another DJ. I think he was either the night or the overnight DJ.
Right.
And Tim Reed probably, in terms, you mentioned Frank Bonner directing, but I'd say arguably Tim Reed had probably the most successful TV in front of the screen career of all the other characters post WKRP.
I'd agree. I'd agree.
So talk to me a little bit about the character and also why you think that Reed succeeded where others didn't.
Reed, he was the person he played on TV was kind of unseen, like by on American television at that point before, and but he was very smart and clever, and despite his outlandish costumes that he wore on the show, and you're right. He was involved with a crime drama called Snoops with his wife, and then he was involved with a wonderful, short-lived sitcom called Frank's Place about a restaurant in New Orleans. And for a while, he had his own studio back in the Petersburg/Richmond, Virginia area that he operated and was producing his own stuff out of. So he was a very astute businessman in addition to, and I agree, he had the best afterlife. I mean, I went through the Enquirer clips and realized that in the I guess early '70s he was part of a comedy team, a black and white comedy team with a guy by the name of Tom Dreesen.
Oh, I know Tom Dreesen. Yeah,
It was been on the Tonight Show a lot back in the
yeah,
'70s or
yeah.
'80s, but it was the Tim and Tom show,
Huh.
and it was the two of them, and their part of their shtick, their humor was in their cultural differences.
Yeah.
But they came through Cincinnati at least a couple of times in the early to mid '70s before the show in '78.
I had no idea that Tim Reed had been in part of a comedy team, much less an interracial one. They must have been like the only interracial comedy team that I can think of.
It's the first one I can think of.
Yeah.
I don't know if there was one before, but it was just interesting that he was into that way performing stand up before he got into sitcoms.
Now, the only other character worth mentioning out of maybe a dozen and a half or so recurring characters is Mrs. Carlson, the big guy, Mr. Carlson's mother. And she appears, I don't know, maybe a dozen episodes. She's sort of really the power behind the purse strings. And I
Right.
remember a number of episodes. She's portrayed in not the best light. She seems to always want to get more from Andy in some method or whatnot. But it not that a sitcom is going to have an antagonist, but she certainly, I think, provided a number of memorable episodes.
Yeah, she was good, and I'm going to go blank. I mean, because she was because all my focus has been on the major six characters. Um, she was the part was recast. A different woman played her in the pilot in the two-part pilot that, or at least in the first part, because the first part of the pilot was filmed in March or April of '78, and then the second half of it after the pickup. But they switched women who did the role, and I agree. They needed something other than WPIG to be their rival. So um, she did a good job, and she played her role really well. But to me, the best episodes were not in her house, but in the radio station itself.
Now, I want to talk about some of the more famous episodes in a little bit, and as well as the new WKRP spinoff and how it compared or didn't compare. But I do want to talk about what you had mentioned, because it seemed to me that the show was doing well in the ratings. It not only was doing well in the ratings, but it was one of those sitcoms that dealt with more serious subjects, but not in the 1970s, 1980s cringe, a very special episode kind of way. And probably the most famous one that comes to mind is when there was the Who concert, and fans got crushed to death because of stadium seating, I think it was called.
Yeah,
And
festival seating. Yep.
yeah, and so let me just ask you about that episode and why, when you have a well-received show, a show that is doing quote unquote a public service to some degree, why they moved it around. But let's talk about that episode first.
Okay. I think part of the bigger picture here. I think part of the tension between CBS and 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 Hugh and the show was that I think probably CBS in their mind had wanted more of a Laverne and Shirley, which was the top rated show at the time,
Mm-hmm.
more hijinks, more physical comedy, and the uh, the vision by Hugh Wilson was a little bit different. He was not afraid to tackle issues. Uh, you mentioned the Who, but really the first the Draft Dodger episode with Tim Reed, and there
Okay.
was the
Oh, that's
episode
right.
of the Explain the Atom to the high school wannabe dropout. So the Who was in that vein of tackling a serious topic about and not all being hijinks and light comedy. So the tragedy happened in Cincinnati on December 3rd, um, and it was a case of there was what called festival seating, full general admission.
Mm-hmm.
The doors were shut. The band did a warm up. This huge crowd of people thought that the concert might have been starting and pushed forward, and 11 young people were trampled or suffocated in this mass of people trying to get through the doors. So shortly after that happened, at a writers' meeting, the writers said, "Hey, we're a rock station in Cincinnati. We got to do an episode about this." And at first, Hugh Wilson even balked at it. Didn't think, we're a comedy. How can we do it? And the writers persisted. So he said, "Okay, put something together." And they put together an episode. And when the news hit here in Cincinnati, because I just earlier this year was reviewing the clippings of it, even the affiliate station said, I don't know if you could, you're a comedy show, whether you could do it or whether we'd run it. We'd want to see it in advance." And so the episode is in two acts. The first act is they're promoting this concert, The Who, and all the things, getting ready for the concert. And then the second act is everybody's back at the station after the concert and talking about, they promoted it and 11 people died. What a tragedy. And then the boss comes in and the big guy, it was all pumped up because it was his first rock concert and he hadn't heard about the deaths because it wasn't announced during the concert. Nobody knew until they got out of the building. So that's how the episode played. It ends with the candlelight out the window, which was to represent a candlelight vigil at Fountain Square, in the city of center of downtown, which is where that fountain is. It was in the opening credits of every show.
Yeah.
And the remarks that the big guy says at the end about we're good people, we're going to do something, we're going to fix this. Actually, the producers were kind of stuck and didn't know what to say, and Gordon told me once that they came to him and said, "Well, you're from that area. What would you say?" And so he had lived something in the rehearsal, and the writer said, "That's great," and they transcribed it and made it part of the script, and was his own words to do that. And then when the show was all put together, it was taped. The Cincinnati affiliate looked at it and liked it and didn't object to it, and so it aired in Cincinnati as well as the rest of the markets.
John, before we move on, I do want to touch on, since you mentioned it just briefly before, the theme song is, I would say, one of those classic theme songs that, with MTM had a lot of ones, Love Is All Around, and you had the MASH theme song, and you had Hawaii 5-0, and the 60s and 70s had so many memorable theme songs. Who wrote the WKRP show song?
The lyrics were written by Hugh Wilson himself,
Okay.
And somebody else did the music. It's usually credited to or thought of as Steve Carlisle, who recorded it and it did the vocal on it. But it was actually Hugh himself who wrote the lyrics, and there's actually, I think, 3 verses to it, maybe 4, but in the open, you only hear the first verse and the refrain.
So let's then talk about some of the more famous episodes. Other than the Who episode, well, even if you include that, probably the most famous one is, as you mentioned earlier, is the Thanksgiving Day episode. What year did that air? Was that the...
So here's the crazy thing. Most of the memorable episodes from my point of view, the turkey episode I think was the 5th. It aired on Halloween, and 2 episodes before it was an episode about the Scum of the Earth, a rock band that was coming in and trashed the place. The second episode after the 2-part pilot was called Les on the Ledge, and Les had gone to the I think it was the Bengals locker room, and one of the players thought he was I think they used the word queer, a queer little guy, and he was offended and was out on the ledge thinking of suicide because somebody had thought he was gay. So they tackled issues early on, but so the Turkey episode ran on the last week of October. There was one more after that, and then CBS pulled it. So even though it was off to a pretty good start and did a huge number in response and had a huge response to the Turkey episode, CBS pulled it and didn't bring it back till late or mid January, and started this pattern of on again, off again. The Turkey episode goes back to the genesis of when Hugh was developing the show. He went back to Atlanta where he had been an ad exec and an advertising company owner, and he had friends at a rock station called WQXI. And so he spent a lot of time with management there and some of the DJs. And the manager of the station had told him about this promotion gone wrong in Texas that this guy was involved with about live turkeys. And it's not clear. The conjecture back and forth was whether it was they were thrown off the back of a truck or actually thrown from a helicopter. But in the Paley Center discussion, Hugh was clear. He said, "I remember a helicopter," and in fact, after the guy told him the story, he said, "Thank you. You just won me an Emmy Award." It didn't win an Emmy Award, but it's always ranked among the funniest episodes of TV, and it is. I think it would be in my top 10. I think it was in the top 30 of the TV Guide list about 20 years ago.
Well, and I think because, it would have been cost prohibitive to try to show something or see the banner. You have the perfect character, Les Nessman, the naive guy, standing in the middle of a mall after being kicked out of a liquor store or something because he was blocking the door or whatever it was.
Shoe store, yeah.
And then his sort of nonchalant way of doing it. He's like, wait, there's a helicopter, and is it? Yeah, I think it is helicopter. WKRP. He draws out the thing that you configure it, and you cut back to the station, and they're like, let's go, and then curiously something's coming out. Is it a skydiver or whatnot? And then no, and then another one, no. Oh my God! In the reference to the Hindenburg, I mean the delivery. It on paper it looks very good, but if you had a different character other than Les Nessman do it, it would not have been as memorable.
Several things. One is apparently Sanders watched the Hindenburg to make sure he matched or that it was more than just inspiration. He copied it and studied it to bring that element to it. Another thing about it was that the episode actually, writing credit goes to Bill Dial, who was a story editor, and there was an engineer character in some of the episodes called Bucky Dornster. It was writer Bill Dial, and so, like I said, the Turkey episode goes back to a story that Hugh Wilson had heard in Atlanta, and he asked Bill Dial to write it, and he said that Dial just missed it. He didn't grasp it, and Wilson rewrote most of it. And when they were discussing it, one of the lines was the turkeys, they're hitting the ground like sacks of wet cement. And Wilson goes, "That was my line." And you mentioned that we never see a helicopter.
Yeah.
We never see a turkey.
Yeah.
And it's still hilarious. I mean, it was written in such a way to stimulate the imagination that makes it even more funny. And then when Herb and Gordon Mr. Carlson come back from the ill-fated promotion, and the set design people put turkey feathers in their hair and so you could see that. But again, you never saw a turkey, and Hugh Wilson said that as a kid, he was a single child growing up. One of his mother's favorite phrases when he got in trouble was, "As God is my witness." And so he pulled that line from his mother and used it there. And in fact, they roll the credits. That line, that just solid gold line, is at the very, very, very end of the show, and that it was built up to. Like I said, it was just perfectly constructed, and yet that was like the 5th episode of the show, and so that was pulled off the air, and CBS said, "You're going to retool it. We want you to punch it up a bit," and he said, "All I did was change the dates on the scripts we had already written and resubmitted them." He didn't change a word. And then in the second half of the year was when they did Who is Gordon Sims, the Tim Reed Venus as his real name, as a draft dodger and all. And so, to me, the amazing thing about it was so well written, but the first season just had all these gems in it that they had right out of the box, and CBS didn't know what to do with it.
Before we get off of the turkey episode, though, I think two things that really sell the ending there is the shell-shocked look that Herb Tarlick has. I mean, he's got all these feathers in his hair, and it's the big guy who's actually talking. Herb is just sort of looking glazed off to the side. And the fact that they have all these feathers in their hair, you're thinking, well, if they should actually be covered with blood or something from the turkeys just exploding, but it gives more of that Marx Brothers kind of fight in a what was it, the famous one in an ocean liner or something kind of feel to it.
The sweet room scene.
Yeah. So that all these feathers are floating around the center of this mall, and they're just landing on people. It's just so absurd because, I mean, just by physics, that probably wouldn't be how it would happen. But
and it was Les Nessman who said that they turned and they were attacking me or the people, and just he was glassy eyed, and it was just like I said, perfect cast, perfect writing, perfect to me, the perfect episode.
So we talked about the Who and the turkeys and the Gordon Sims episode. Are there any 2 or 3 episodes that stand out in your mind the most from the series, and why?
The one is the fish. They called the fish story. It was when Herb was in the KRP carp fish costume, and the pig from mascot from WPIG. There's one scene with Herb had to go pee, and he tries to go to the bathroom, and he's in this fish suit. But it was also the one that and I've heard this done on other radio stations. The police officer comes in and Johnny Fever and Flytrap were on the air and gave him drinks, and it was supposed to show that after so many drinks you get disoriented and you get tongue-tied and slurred and all that. But Howard Hesseman, the more he drank, the sharper and clearer he got, as opposed to more drunk. And that was one of my favorites. And there was, like, I think two different two-parters where Johnny might have gone to L.A. and Johnny was talking about his where he went disco at one point, and just to see him stretch it a bit were a couple of my favorites.
Now, I'm going to throw out an episode that I haven't seen in 40 plus years, but I vaguely remember it, and it just came back to me as you were talking. Isn't there an episode where, is it Venus and Johnny, the station tower is knocked out and they have to go to the tower itself to broadcast, and they get locked in a room or something? Does that ring a bell?
That rings a bell, but I'm going to be vague on that too. I haven't seen a lot of, they haven't been on the air for 4 or 5 years, at least in this market. Antenna TV used to run them, and a couple others. So Nick at Night ran them back in the 90s. I mean, one of the problems with it, they were shot on videotape, not on film. When you look at Cheers today or Mary Tyler Moore, it just glows. And there's this kind of this dull haze over the KRP because it was on videotape. And it was cheaper. But apparently it was one of the reasons it was on videotape, it was cheaper because they had to pay some of the music rights. I mean, another character in KRP is the great rock and roll that was on the air with it. And when I first watched it, I was kind of blind to this fact because I was just into TV sitcom comedy. But the music that they played, and particularly the syndicated version, it's just been this generic movie that the music that was replaced. And 20th Century Fox released the first season on DVD. I think it was in 2008, and it was all generic music. And the Shot Factory did a 4 DVD, 4 seasons, the complete set in 2014, and they restored. I mean, I counted like more than 100 artists that their music was back in, and so I'm trying to think. It was I've heard them say that both Howard Hesseman and Tim Reed picked some of the music they played, and had a choice in what was. In fact, there was one. I think it was a Blondie song. I don't know if it was Heart of Glass. Anyway, that they broke it on KRP, and then radio stations picked it up, and it went to gold, and the record company sent KRP a gold record, which is seen on the wall in one of the scenes in one of the seasons, because of the rock music producers saw KRP as a way to promote some songs. But I think it was Tim Reed who said he was probably the first to play Bob Marley record on TV. So like I said, I was blind to this at first, but probably the best example of restoring the music was when, and it's one of my favorite episodes, is when Les is going to go get his Silver Sal Award at the dinner, and he asked Jennifer, and she says she'd go with him. And at the same time, Herb is trying to hit on Jennifer all the time, and he keeps on being told no. And Les buys a curly wig to wear, and as he's pulling it on as he's getting dressed that evening and putting on his wig, Hot Blooded is the soundtrack to it, and with the generic rock, it's just not as funny as a song we all know. And that's a great episode, but also a great. There's another one. There was in the first part of the Turkey episode. Part of it, the setup is that Mr. Carlson wants to get more involved with the station, and he comes in the station, and Johnny Fever is playing some sort of track with dogs that I don't know if it was the Who, I forget the band, and he goes, "Are those dogs?" And Johnny says yes, and that's cut out of because they didn't have the rights to do it, even in the Shout Factory. And then he picks up another album and said, "Hey, what about this one?" And Johnny looks at him and says, "Sorry, man, I don't play requests," and just blows him off. And then he goes to Bailey, and Bailey said, "I'm trying to pick out what kind of T-shirt. I don't know if I should do this or the foreigner ones." And Carlson said, "Well, do the other one because the foreign stuff always shrinks." So it was, and that was the setup to him wanting to pull off this turkey drop at top secret without telling the rest of the staff.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm bouncing all over the place here.
No, that's fine. It's I'm wondering because I remember when The Odd Couple was issued or reissued on DVD about 15, 20 years ago, they were lacking a lot of the songs too, because the character of Felix, played by Tony Randall, often sang on the show,
Yeah.
opera and whatnot, and they were refused that, and they actually had like opera singers on the show, and so yeah, it's a shame that I mean, if you sign away, to let the show have it, I just don't see where it's not a free advertisement for the music. It's just very short sighted in my view. And I'm wondering, you mentioned the videotape issue. Is it more difficult to sort of computer correct videotape than film, I wonder?
I don't know. I just knew that when I see the opening scenes of Cheers, I mean it just glistens. The light sparkles off those glasses on the racks above it, and yet in KRP it's kind of a haze. It's kind of like you're looking through gauze or whatever. But I've always been told that it was a budget issue, that it was better to do it, or easier, cheaper to do it on videotape. And I think to me, that's the only reason the show might not hold up as well as the others. The humor in it, the writing, the characters are just I think perfect. So
another episode that came to mind when you were speaking about this stuff, there's the episode where Jennifer finally says yes to her, to go to a no-tell motel or whatever, and he shits his pants basically because he doesn't really want it. He just wants the fantasy of it.
they you know they played that about as long as they could, but it was the two of them and the way she would treat him normally, and then that she would go out on a date with her, and I think there was some reference. It was in the date with the Silver Shawl Award where he makes a reference to her bed or something, to Herb later in it. And then there's also another personal favorite of mine is when they hired Sparky Anderson, the former Reds manager, to come in and be the sports talk show and do sports, take it away from Les. And he was just awful. And the tagline is, I don't know what it is. Every time I come to Cincinnati, I get fired.
So the cancellation, was it, as they were moving it around, was it basically a foregone conclusion that the show was probably not going to have the 6-7 year run that a lot of the more successful ratings-wise shows have? And what was the actual final reason why they canceled it?
Well, it was something I only pieced together a couple of years ago, and there was it was thought that the last episodes ran in April of '82 before CBS announced its fall lineup and cancellations in May of '82. It turns out that there were 2 episodes that were not aired, preempted at the last minute in April by CBS and kept in the bank. So that summer, so it was canceled May 10th or May 7th, whatever it was in May, and not going to get a 5th season. Well, that summer in repeats, the ratings came, I'm not going to say through the roof, but it was very high. And a couple of times they even were the #1 show of the week in the Nielsen ratings, and beating Laverne and Shirley. And it's common in TV that Cheers is another example, that the first year the ratings weren't very good, but in the summer repeats, when people had seen whatever was opposite it, that the ratings would pop up. And so it had a very good summer, even though the show had been canceled. And they ran one original in, I think, the first week in August, and again, it was the #1 show of the week, and it popped up. Well, so that September was the annual Emmy Awards, which is how that you kick off the TV season with the Emmy Awards, and KRP was up for Best Sitcom. And so CBS took the last original episode and scheduled it the Monday night, the day after the Emmy Awards. So on the Emmy Awards, the KRP did not win. it was either Barney Miller or Taxi. I forget which of the two. And then the next night you had this KRP, the last original one, even though it was just the last one filmed much earlier in the year, and their numbers went through the roof. Um, it in its half-hour position, it did better than Monday Night Football, which it was opposite. But at that point, the 18th or 19th of September, it was too late to be able to reverse the cancellation and bring it back, even though it was a rated success all summer and for the first week of the season. Gary Sandy was already on a Broadway show. Howard Hessman was moving on to another show. Lonnie Anderson had moved to another show. She was doing something called Partners in Crime that came out the next year. So anyway, it was, they couldn't get the band back together. So that was another tragedy of KRP, is that it became a hit after it had been canceled, and there was no way to bring it back together.
Now, it is one of those shows that it's rare, did within a decade or so spawn a sequel series. And I probably saw a handful of the original show. I probably saw 75% of them on first run. And I probably saw a handful of the new WKRP almost a decade later. What was the premise of the show? How did it fare artistically? Was it as well written? Could it have been a hit possibly? And it was in syndication, right? It wasn't on a network.
It was in syndication. So the deal was MTV sold the KRP reruns. You'd strip Monday through Friday, and then on Saturday you'd get a new episode of the new one. So it was to run Saturday or Sunday, and that was the package deal. The spinoff was with 3 original cast members: Richard Sanders, Gordon Jump, and Frank Bonner, and they signed Hessman and Lonnie Anderson to make periodic guest star appearances. They had a different couple as a morning team. French Stewart, who was on Third Rock, was part of the cast. Michael T. Williamson, the woman who was in the White Snake videos. I mean, the cast
Tawny
wasn't Tawny Katane. The characters didn't click with the audience, and it ran for 2 years, and then when Pat Robertson bought the studio, it was first canceled.
When you say Pat Robertson, you're talking of the minister?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was the group that bought that bought MTM Studios and then inherited the library. But I watched most of them. Most of them aren't memorable. I mean, there wasn't a Turkeys episode or a Draft Dodger episode or a Who episode or whatever, softball episode. They try, and in fact, Bill Dial. I think Hugh Wilson was involved with directing the pilot. Bill Dial, who was a writer on a story editor on the first one, was one of the. I think he was the executive producer of the second run. The pieces just didn't all fit, and it was just kind of a typical sitcom, if I can say that.
Mm-hmm. So, the premise of this series on TV shows that I'm doing, as well as this one, will be why WKRP in Cincinnati is great. If we just go back to the original show, what would be your answer to those who've never heard of or never seen any episodes? Why should they watch WKRP, and why was it a great show?
They should watch WKRP. It was a great show because these characters were distinctive, funny, and all worked together, and the writing of it just fit together hand in glove. And you could pick any episode without watching the first one. All you need to know is this is a sitcom about a failing, low-rated Cincinnati radio station that's struggling struggling to establish itself as a rock format after years as doing easy listening or elevator music, etc. And you can literally drop into any episode and immediately get who these characters are and find them very funny, without having to watch, you know, 4 or 6 episodes to get an idea of what's going on here. And, and I mean, if you drop into Abbott Elementary, it might take you a while to figure out who these characters are and how they interact. With these, it was, I think, automatic that because they were so distinct and they were so funny and how they related with each other.
Well,
And
John, oh, go ahead.
the other thing I say is, and the people in the radio industry, as I said earlier, have said that, yeah, we worked with these people, we know these people. This was truly a believable, realistic characterizations of people that they worked with at radio stations.
Well, John Kieswetter, thanks for spending about an hour talking about this great American sitcom WKRP in Cincinnati.
It's been a lot of fun, Dan. Thanks for the invite.